Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show to talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Wheel of Time. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, in the aftermath of the battle against Logain, we see them burying the dead. And what I think is interesting, you even see Lan kind of showing proper respect to even the king, even though they were enemies. So I'm like, I guess it's that kind of thing of even showing your enemies, kind of giving them a proper burial so that their souls can be spun back out into the will, I guess, at some point in time. But obviously you have Stefan, the almost heartbreaking thing, having to bury Perrin and taking the ring. Now, we get context to that later on because they dump the rings and basically melt them down. So, I brought it up before. Doesn't seem like we got a clear answer on whether or not that helps them channel the one power or not. Or is it just supposed to be indicative? Because I feel because either it's supposed to be symbolic of because we know the white cloaks in particular, what was Home Dude's name? It's Iman Bowden or something like that, I think is Home Dude's name, who has all those rings. I don't know if he's the only one. I'm sure there's other white cloaks that do that whole collecting Aes Sedai's rings. But I don't know if it's supposed to be just right, so no one tries to rob her grave to steal that. Because I was wondering, if it falls into the wrong hands, could it be that person could start channeling? Does it help them, or does it make it a little easier to channel, or is it just symbolic of it represents an Aes Sedai, and because it's those rings don't get repurposed, because I guess it's meant for this person and this person alone, and when they're gone, the ring needs to disappear. So they didn't really go into that, but I'm curious the reasoning for it. But the ritual to represent that, it's the fact is that Stefan, when they were heading to the White Tower, he had to make sure that he rode with Krene's horse, and I think her boot on the side, and rather the empty horse is supposed to be symbolic of she's going and she died, because the moment they were walking through the streets, because everyone's throwing everything at the dragon, because it's oh, false dragon, blah blah blah, shame, shame, shame type of thing. But the moment people saw Krene's empty horse, it's just people were gasping oh my god, they knew what it meant. So, and now, it's giving, they've already had the burial, but now this is kind of the final farewell, is, he has to put on white, and he's I haven't put on white since my dad died. He's and truth be told, I didn't like my dad, but he'd always get drunk, and he would fight, people all the time. Stefan wasn't always the man that he is now. He is the way he is now, because he was looking for a fight, and he stepped up to an Aes Sedai, Krene, and she put him in his place. But, basically, he never found himself worthy, because she's a powerful Aes Sedai. She could have chosen anyone as her ward, but she chose him. And even though he tried to turn it down, she's no, you're mine. He never felt worthy enough, so every day he fought to become worthy of her, And even Lan was kind of right, if you ever, you can bond with someone else. And he was you come to me after Moraine died and see if it's so easy to, go to another woman. So, kind of understanding the depths of this, bond between Aes Sedai and their ward, that it runs so deep, because even Alana was, I believe it was Alana that was saying it was almost being swallowed, that Stefan is pretty much been swallowed by death himself. The connection runs that deep, it runs that, and the fact is that it's I could bond with someone else, but it's I wonder how often does that happen. It seems it's probably rare, because most Aes Sedai outlive their ward. Because the relationship, I guess, I'm wondering how back and forth is it? Does the Aes Sedai feel what the ward does? Because they mainly make it seem like the ward feels what the Aes Sedai does. So it seems it's a symbolic relationship that they both feel it, Because the last episode 3, no, it was episode 4, made the conversation sound like it was more episode 3, it was definitely episode 3, made it sound like it was just it was more so the ward feels what the Aes Sedai does. But like I said, it seems like they're also suggesting it is a two-way street in that. It's not just a one-way situation, but I guess I was wondering if it was kind of like a bond for life thing. It's supposed to be until death did us part, and death did them part. So it's, but you know, he went to Nynaeve because he was like, yeah, sometimes like when I drift off, I almost forget. And she's like, oh, that's good. He's like, no, the pain is all I have left of her. And once that's gone, it's like every bit of her will be gone. So Nynaeve told him, like, don't worry, that pain will never go away. Because she's talking from experience. So like, once you've lost someone, that pain never goes away. It's always with you. So you'll always have a piece of her with you. Once again, it's like the fact is you're so broken heart meant something to you. So if you're able to keep that pain in your heart, if it stays with you, it's sad, but also like there is a beautifulness to it because it's like, right, that pain just means you're never forgetting that person, that they are still there somewhere in your heart, you know? And he talked to Lan about the whole thing with Nynaeve, and he was kind of like, because he basically suggested like, oh yeah, like, Nynaeve is in love with him because it's like, yeah, she quickly kind of had like, I don't think she's ever really like, once again, she even recognized like, oh yeah, I have my own preconceived notions, but spending time with him, like she has started developing feelings for him, but he was like, that's not a good idea. Now I don't know whether that's purely because I'm with Moiraine. Moiraine is my everything, like cause we don't, and this does present an interesting thing. I doubt a ward can serve two different Aes Sedai. An Aes Sedai can have more than one ward, but it doesn't work that other way around. Like a ward can have more than one Aes Sedai. But I think that's probably why, because he's like, my bond, my everything is Moiraine, and it's like, outside of that, like, there's no room for it, or maybe there's stuff in his own past that he's just like, she's foolish to kind of fall for me because I have my own demons and I'm not the man that she thinks I am, type of thing. It could be one or the other, or it could be a combination of the two. But it, like, I was kind of wondering, I was like, is he gonna drug Lan? I don't know why I had that inkling and that feeling, but he does. Because he knew if Lan was awake, like, he would not be able to do what he needs to do. And so by the time Lan awakes, it's the next day, and Stepin had killed himself in the hallway of, like, that are, like, because basically those statues represent the wards of the past who served, the Aes Sedai. Once again, we don't know what their, like, life expectancy is, because, like, Alana was talking to Moiraine about, like, a long time, so I'm like, is their lifespan different than, like, a normal, typical humans? Like, I was curious about that. Like, not that they live forever or have immortality, but more like they live unextended, or maybe not, maybe it's just kind of like, right, like, she was just speaking from, like, the average human lifespan of, like, yeah, you would have a long time ahead of us. I don't know. Because it makes you wonder, like, how many wards do most Aes Sedai go through, you know? But, like I said, just in front of, like, all of them, Stepin killed himself because they were suggesting, like, him being bonded to Alana. And I love that he was joking, like, I've never been with a man. And it's like, two men. And it's like, and I love the line was joking with her, like, what makes you think they want you? He's like, who wouldn't want this, you know? But, yeah, it's just like he couldn't be without her because she was the one that gave him a chance. He's like, I became a better man because of her. It's like, if I don't have her, you know, because, Moiraine was actually talking to Alana about it. Like, she found a way, she knows a way to sever the bond between an Aes Sedai and a, ward. And even Alana was like, don't do that. Like, Lan's gonna be fine. Like, you're gonna be around. But after this, like, you see that moment, because that's what makes me think it is reciprocal, like, it's a two-way street, because when Lan was, like, when they're doing their funeral for, Stepin, and he's, like, just in so much pain, you see Moiraine just, like, tearing up, because she feels it. But I think it's also, like, it's probably going to push her to that point where she'll go, like, she wants to probably destroy the bond between her and Lan, because it's, like, if something ever happens to her, she wants him to be able to live and move on, because the bond is so deep that he won't be able to, that he would probably follow in his footsteps, and then it's like, I don't want you to do that. I want you to be free and live your life. So, because after, like, he had talked to Stepin that day of, like, when he was dressed in white, and, like, he went back to Moiraine, and he, like, got on his knees, like, he was touching her, in particular, her ring, and it's just kind of, like, his hands were kind of shaking a little bit, because he's, like, he doesn't even want to imagine what that's like. He can't imagine, won't allow himself to, So I'm curious to see what that means, because I think the fact is Moraine's throwing that out there definitely adds validity to that being a possibility. But another really interesting thing in this series too is that we got introduced to the fact is, oh, not everything's copacetic in the White Tower. Like, there's a lot of bad blood. Like, everyone's kind of out to get their own. Like, everyone's got their own ambitions. That's why Moraine wanted to hide Nynaeve away, because it's like, literally everyone is going to be trying to nab you up, because like, you are set to become a novice now that you've touched the power and displayed everything. You're going to be a novice, and people are going to want to jump for you to go ahead and become a novice. And then like all these different people, we already see Liandrin trying to make her moment. She's trying to get close to Nynaeve, because Nynaeve was like, oh, like, Reds typically don't have wards. I mean, it probably doesn't even typically never have wards. And so she's like, oh, do you hate men? And she's like, Liandry's like, well, some do, but she's like, I don't. Like, her disdain for them isn't like that. She's like, it's just, because she kind of suggested, like, I don't hate men, because the fact is, like, you know, men control the world, you know, and men will, like, even when you're a small girl, seemed like she was talking from experience, that men will snuff out any spark that makes you shine, just because it makes you shine brighter than them. But even later, Moraine was like, yeah, you want to sway her to hate men like you. So it's like, it seemed like she was trying to hide from it, but it's like, yeah, she does hate men. So I think that's fascinating. Because even Alana was like, be careful, because the top person in the seat is looking for blood after this whole like dragon debacle, everything with Logain. Plus, Liandry is like getting everyone on her side. Like her powers are growing, but also her influence, and it's not just with the Reds. So it's like, yo, there's like some like Civil War like politics going on here. Of like, you know, it's almost like a popularity contest almost, but like, it's so interesting to know, like, oh, we're supposed to all be in this together, we're sisters, yet there is this political angle to it. Like, once again, it's just like, because even though they're Aes Sedai, they are people, and people do what they do best. It's like, they want something, they're gonna go for it. Like, now what Liandrin wants in the grand scheme of things, who knows? We have some idea about what Moraine is, but even like Moraine's like positional things, because even Alana's like, no one, like, you keep all your secrets, but eventually they will kind of like eat you from the inside out type of thing. And so Moraine does keep a lot of stuff close to the vest, because she was even suggesting like, hey, like, you know, Nynaeve's going to need someone to mentor her, and obviously you're not here at the tower a lot, so she's almost suggesting like, oh, I'll be the one, you know. So we'll see. But even like Moraine is like, yeah, Nynaeve's not going to like be so copacetic with like the Reds, especially because the Reds have that very like negative connotation towards, like, have a negative position towards men. So like Nynaeve wouldn't like immediately sign up to that. But Liandrin seems like she is the manipulative type to get what she wants in the end. So we'll see if that ends up being the case or not. Other elements to this episode, I mean, first and foremost, like we catch up with Rand and Mat, because I forgot to talk about it earlier. We get like a month time skip, you know, for everyone to kind of, well, the only ones who made it to, you know, White Tower, granted Rand and Mat didn't get there. They made it to the White City though. I was almost wondering whether or not the people that were traveling with were connected to the Tinkerers. Like I said, I still think that's like the derogatory name for them, because I'm going to butcher their real name every time. Because I'll say it once and then just immediately forget it, because I'm not good at like this high fantasy, like throwing terms at you like crazy. But Matt's situation is getting worse, and so they were able to find a place to rest. And I love that Rand ended up running into an Ogier named Loial. And he's fascinated by Rand, because he's like, oh, you're from the Two Rivers. And he refers to Rand as an Aielman? I'm butchering it. It's the guy that Tom cut down in episode 3. He had referenced, like, it seems like Loial was kind of referencing that Rand might be that. But Rand's like, I'm not that. He's like, oh, one of those from the Two Rivers claiming they're not one. Now, it actually adds a lot of context to some stuff I was curious about. Because I was under the misconception, and now in retrospect, it makes sense. I kept being like, oh, Perrin and Rand are using, like, they're touching the power just like Matt is, but it's like, right, why haven't they slipped into madness like he has? That's because Rand and Perrin are on some other stuff. I'm like, no one in this group is just like a regular person that potentially happens. I mean, one of you's the dragon, so it had to be like there's something else to it, but I think that probably explains, like, why Rand was able to, like, bust that door down, because, like, those people are known to be fighters, so, like, super strong, so Rand's family situation might not be, like, I don't know whether that's, I don't know, I'm curious, like, about that group of people, like, are they, like, is it men and women or that, or is it, because if it's men and women, maybe his mom was one, or not less be implying, like, his dad isn't his actual dad, that his dad is, like, the guy that took care of him at a young age, but he doesn't remember, like, oh, you were adopted, so you don't really know your real family type of thing. But also, like, we'll get to Perrin's thing, but it's like, yeah, that's not magic. That's something deep ingrained in him. Because if they were tapping into the one power, they'd be in that situation, but they're not. So I think that's just so fascinating, like how that's all playing out. But Rand does eventually run into Nynaeve, because actually Loial found, because Rand was talking about Iguin earlier, but he was looking for a lady with a braid, and he found Nynaeve in the process and brought her. And he's like, oh, and I love that he's got that very approach, because he's telling, like, he's bringing up that point later on when, like, Rand ran off. He was like, oh, you humans, always in a rush, not even taking things slow to properly prepare. Like, he's very much kind of got that, God, there's someone in reference. It's kind of like an Eeyore/Owl thing. It's a weird thing to reference, but, like, you know how, like, Eeyore's very slow when in his words and how he talks, but then you have, like, Owl, who goes on these diatribes about these stories about family men. He's almost kind of got that, because while Nynaeve and Rand were having their reunion, he's still in the background talking about something, you know? So I think it's so fascinating. But Nynaeve, you know, talks to Rand about, like, right, we don't need the Aes Sedai to help Matt. She's like, I'll treat Matt the way I can, and you don't have to worry about Iguin, because she had brought up the fact is that, and that was a heartbreaking disease to hear about. What is it, like, I forgot what the name of it was, but it's it's like basically it, like, makes your legs bend backwards, that basically it typically kills most people, and because it leads to them breaking their own arms and legs. You're like, it just makes you want to clasp your own body. You're like, oh, that's gnarly. And she had it, and the old wisdom that Nynaeve served was trying to, like, give her something to ease the pain, like to make the transition into the afterlife easier, like ease her pain. But Iguin, like 10 years old, grabs Nynaeve's hand and was like, no, I'm not ready to go, and she fought. That's the thing of, like, trying to say, the fact is that the fever broke not Iguin the next day, so it's like Iguin she's unbreakable, she doesn't break, which is a neat parallel for their current circumstances. But I had skipped over it, but Matt, I don't know whether this really happened or whether it was all in Matt's head, but when the dragon was going by, he looked at Matt because he saw a kindred spirit of, like, the madness, because I think even when the power is taken from you, the madness that's probably as far as it's already taking you, there's probably no reversing that. I don't know if that goes away. Like, say, like, let's say, like, your sanity's at, like, 100. Using a video game series that I'm a really big fan of, Shadow Hearts, with the whole sanity meter. Say, like, you have, like, let's say, like, your sanity's, like, 65. You know, anytime you use Yuri's fusion and stuff like that, it cuts your it divides up your sanity. It kind of makes me think of that, but it's like, my point is, I'm about to go into a tangent about an example that most people listening to this won't get, because it's like, I think that's a niche enough video game. I don't think anyone's going to know that offhand, so I won't go into the whole diatribe I was about to go into it, but nevertheless, I'm wondering, my point was, like, if your sanity, like, say, like, you're 100% sane, and because you basically were touched by the power and your madness took you down to about 50 points of sanity, would you maintain that 50 point of sanity, or once the power is removed, will you slowly but surely build back up? Like, how long would it take for your sanity to come back? Will it ever come back? Questions like that I'm still curious about. because there's stuff I'm bringing up that I'm like, maybe the book goes over, because there's probably a lot that you drop when it comes to, you know, an adaptation, because you're like, you don't want to, like, there's, because the way someone described it, it sounds like a lot of stuff is kind of being cut around, because, like, a lot of the books apparently go, like, super deep into certain things, and just, it's like that Tolkienism of, like being super descriptive about stuff and like that. It's almost of that vein and level, so I'm curious whether some of these questions I have are things that do eventually get answered in the story, or were they things that were answered in the books. I mean, how much of this stuff is stuff that's completely different from the books? Like, did they take something from the books and then, like, twist it and tweak it television-wise? So, like, something I'm asking about might just be something from the TV show, and not from the actual books, and you know, that type of thing. But regardless, my point was, I was wondering, because the dragon looked at Matt, like I said, they found a kindred spirit, but then, like, Matt looked back down, and, like, the dragon was facing the other way, so I'm like, was that all in Matt's head? Was that his madness taking over? And it's like, oh, like, because he's like, oh, he recognized the dragon as someone who went mad, and his madness was making him go like, oh, this is going to be you, kind of almost like a Joker type of thing. I know I'm making all the references today, aren't I? Typically do. But Matt made Rand promise him, like, right, if either one of us ever goes mad with that power, we will kill the other one and spare them. Because he's like, I don't want to end up like Logain. Like, so promise me. And he promises. And Matt promises him, I'll do the same thing for you. So, because Matt's already on the deep end, and that's probably going to, it seems like that is probably where things are going to end up on that front. We'll see. Let's see if that ends up being the case. But aside from all of that, we had Perrin and Iguin still with the traveling people. And I think it's so fascinating, because he was even saying, like, oh, isn't it hypocritical? You guys are about non-violence and stuff like that, the way of the leaf, but then, like, you let your dogs, like, eat whatever animals in a way. Isn't that a little hypocritical? He's like, no, the way of the leaf isn't, like, about pretending that violence doesn't exist. It's about accepting it and kind of choosing not to give into it. So I think that's fascinating. It's like recognizing, yeah, it's the violence, it's in all of us. It's just about accepting it, but just not giving into it. Sadly, the White Cloaks are there, and Valden, or just, I think his name is like Iman, it's like his first name. Because like I said, his V-Dude recognized Perrin and Iguin, and it's like, right, he's like, oh, I reckon I never forget a face, but the travelers, like, they won't get out of the way. It's like, right, they're part of us, they've sat down and ate with us, so there are people, so if they don't want to go with you, they don't have to go with you, so they stand firm. And he's like, oh, a leaf can't stand in the way of the light. It's like, the light can be blocked by a child's hand, but a leaf, no matter what it would you do, crumple it, crush it, destroy it, it will always return to earth. But they push on through, like, slapping their way through people. You're like, oh god, you're just garbage, aren't you? Luckily, Aram tried to get Perrin and Iguin away, still got captured. They did the most disrespectful thing, too. They took out Iguin's braid. Obviously, what that's symbolic of, like, the sisterhood, you know, her connection to Nynaeve, as well as the others from Twin Rivers. But, yeah, like, I guess he wanted to clean her up a little bit, because it's like, oh, you don't have to be so, like, when I interrogate you, you don't have to be so filthy. So he's putting her through the ringer, because that's the thing of, like, why, I guess he wants to test out any woman he comes across, because because in his mind, it's like, you coming back, and, like, it's like, couldn't it just be like, she just happens to come across you? Like, any woman that's ever crossed your paths before twice, on the second time, you're like, oh, you were brought into my life for a reason, you must be an Aes Sedai or something. I'm like, what kind of effed up logic is that? Nothing beyond that is that's what was driving him, is like, oh, there had to be a reason why the light brought you back into my life. So she's like, sir, and he was like, no, Chow Valden, because I'm not the one in charge here, you know, the light is, you know, I'm just kind of a servant to it. So she's just like, please, like, I'm not an Aes Sedai, I can't channel. He's like, and he brought out something interesting. He was like, apparently Aes Sedais don't actually need words or hands to channel. It's just actually, it's actually limiting yourself by using your hands or your words. I'm like, that's fascinating. Because there was another situation with that, like, there was something else magic related where, like, using words actually hinders you, and learning to do it without it is actually more freeing of you. So I think it's interesting to know that that's applicable to the Aes Sedai. But if he's trying to force her hand, and it's like, right. And he starts cutting up Perrin, but the moment he starts doing it, Perrin's eyes start glowing like yellow. I'm like, wait. I was like, are you a werewolf or something? Or at least part wolf? But basically, like I said, I think his name was Valnut. I'm blanking on it now. But White Cloak dude is like, I'll give you two choices. You channel and I kill you and let him go, or you don't channel and I kill him and I let you go. So it's up to you. But despite everything, you know, Perrin is saying, like, I deserve this. And he tells Iguin the truth about, like, right, I killed my wife. And he's like, I deserve this. You know, it's just like in that moment. But still, it's like, she's basically saying, like, it's going to take a while for you to believe this, but you don't deserve it. Like, that was an accident. It wasn't your fault. But he's about ready to kind of start slicing up Perrin again. But Iguin channels the power and starts channeling. Granted, she wasn't able to channel it to the extent Nynaeve was able to, but she gets a little fire off, but it's not enough. I wonder, is it just because the flame was that weak, or do they have, like, clothing that does protect them to some extent from Aes Sedai powers? Whatever the case may be, that I guess, truth be told, it was mainly a distraction, because the main thing was she was cutting Perrin free, and in that moment he snaps free and his eyes are glowing yellow, and I'm like, yo, I was about to go beast mode, but it's like, no, Iguin got dead, and I was like, yeah, sadly the dude's not dead, he's just super injured, so he's definitely going to come back to screw them over later on. This ain't the end, but pretty much every White Cloak there is getting ripped apart by a wolf, because I guess, like, they felt Perrin's call out to them. Like, once again, like, I was wondering, like, whether Perrin was using, like, magic or, like, the one power to, like, draw them in, but it's like, no, I think it's something a lot more internal, something more animalistic in him. So, like I said, maybe he's part wolf, and so that kind of probably explains, like, why he went full-blown aggro. And I wasn't expecting that to be the case, but I figured that maybe Perrin will try to go down the way of the Leaf route, but it's going to be probably in contradiction with his nature. But once again, it's about recognizing that violence is in us, that animal is in him. It's just about controlling it and not letting it control you, type of thing. So, but yeah, the wolves, like, let them go as they're, like, ripping into these guys. You're like, yeah, these guys are assholes, so I'm glad they're getting their comeuppance. So that's definitely interesting. So that's the last we see of them, but hopefully they make their way to the, because they are fairly close-ish to the White City / White Tower, so they're, like, right there. So we're about to have everybody reunited, so it's definitely going to be interesting going forward until, like, once again, it's like everyone's in this group is going through their own thing right now, so it's definitely going to be interesting when everyone finally meets up again, but not everyone's going to be the same, because they've all grown and gone through stuff in their respective journeys, leading them down the paths, whether it's as the dragon or not. Each one of them is going down a path to something that's changing them forever, because even Moraine had talked about it, like, right, like, talked to Nynaeve about the fact is, like, right, you're lashing out because you're scared. She's like, I get it. You tapped into that power, and now there's a part of you that's like, right, that's kind of scared, like, right, wouldn't not have done this. Is there no going back? And Moraine's like, no, there isn't. But it's like, that can be a gift. I think that's applicable to a lot of people amongst the five of them, that there is no going back. Each one of them is down the path that, you know, there might be some challenges. Even the Matt situation, like, what that turns into, I get the feeling Matt's going to die. Like, Rand is going to end up killing him, and that's going to propel Rand's story forward. Or maybe there's going to be something else, because not unless they set Matt up to be completely consumed and given over, like, not unless he's the one that ends up betraying them and giving himself over to the Dark One, and he becomes, like, the new Logain to an extent, like, not unless that ends up being the case. He could end up becoming, like, a new antagonist in the story, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.